Good morning. We are so happy to have you here at Westminster this morning. The Old Testament reading this morning is from 1 Samuel 1, 4 through 20, and 2, 1 through 10. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to his wife, Peninnah, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival used to provoke her severely to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her,
"Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?"
After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly, and she made this vow.
O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and a razor will never touch his head.
As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, and only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. And there Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her,
"How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine."
But Hannah answered,
No, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time.
And then Eli answered,
Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made of him.
And she said,
Let your servant find favor in your sight.
Then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord, and then they went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her in due time. Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she said,
I will name him Samuel, for I have asked him of the Lord.
Hannah prayed and said,
My heart exults in the Lord, my strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in my victory. There is no holy one like the Lord, no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, and those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might does one prevail. The Lord, his adversaries, shall be shattered. The Most High will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed.
Our gospel reading this morning comes from Mark 13, verses 1 through 8. Listen to this. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teachers, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumor of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." I've always thought it was appropriate that Veterans Day is celebrated in the same month as Thanksgiving. For when we think of our veterans, men and women who have served our country, it is easy to give thanks. It is easy to feel thankful for their service, for their work in protecting our freedoms and our lives, for their work in liberating others and protecting those from people who would wish them harm. While I always pray for a day in which we do not have any more veterans because there is no more war, in the meantime, I will give thanks to God for those who choose to serve in this way. For war is hell, but those who serve do so because they have hope. Hope that war is birth pangs, that war will bring about something new, an era of peace, opportunities and possibilities that weren't there before. That out of the pain of war, new life will be born and will flourish. Jesus connects war with birth pangs in our gospel reading this morning. He warns the disciples that they will hear of wars and rumors of wars, and nations will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines. This, many will say, is the end of the world. But Jesus reframes it, saying, "Do not be alarmed. It is but the beginning of birth pangs." It is hard this morning to not dwell in those words of gloom from Jesus, to not see those signs all around us. It is hard in the wake of the terrorist attacks in Paris and Beirut, in the bombing at a funeral in Baghdad, in the continued violence in Syria, in the earthquakes in Japan and Mexico. It is hard to not despair, to see the end of the world as we know it, to envision that violence and war encroaching on our own shorelines. It is hard to not be alarmed and not be anxious, to not clamor for violence and retribution. It is painful as we imagine the scores of people who have to live with these very real fears of terrorist attack every single day. How can this possibly be redeemed into good? How can this very real pain and death not be the pain of sin and endings? How can Jesus claim this pain is birth pangs, the pain that comes before the birth of new life? The lectionary has done something beautiful in combining Jesus' descriptions of these gloomy things in the world and birth pangs with Hannah's birth experience. Both passages touch on a world filled with despair and anxiety and frustration. Both passages depict our God as having a bigger plan than we can see. Both passages offer hope in the face of change. Both passages highlight the power of new life, even in the midst of apparent endings. Hannah's story of new life is very powerful and full of emotion. For a woman in her time, to be barren, that meant God had abandoned you, that the Lord had closed her womb, and that you were less than in the eyes of society, that you had not fulfilled your role. Hannah is even mocked, irritated, provoked by her husband's other wife for being barren. Her husband doesn't understand why his love isn't enough to fill that hole in her heart and her life. So Hannah turns to God in frustration and in lament and with a bold spirit, pleading with God to remember her help prayer. Her prayers are misunderstood by the priest Eli, but as she explains herself, the priest Eli voices his support for her prayers. And then in God's time, she becomes full of new life, bearing a baby boy that she names Shamuel. God has heard. Hannah's response is once again to turn to God in prayer, singing a song of thanksgiving for the mightiness of God, her thanks and wow prayer, for the way that God lifts up those in misery and despair. She acknowledges that God is the source of all, the creator of the world and everything in it, and that in God rest all power and strength. She does not praise her body for finally nurturing a baby or forget to acknowledge God in her happy moments. For a woman so rooted in her faith, the highs and the lows are brought to God, from whom all things come. Those who know the Samuel story know that Hannah keeps her vow to God and gives Samuel to be raised in the temple. Samuel goes on to be the servant of the Lord and leader of Israel. Hannah gives thanksgiving for the birth pangs, thanksgiving to God for what God has brought her through and for the way God is giving new life through her, even when she thought all was lost.